Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Change Cafe, the ACMP Ontario podcast, where we sit down with change leaders, practitioners, and thinkers to explore the real stories behind how change actually happens. I'm Andrew Ourique, and thank you all for joining us for episode 2. And it's my absolute pleasure to introduce our guest for today's episode, Rich Batchelor. Rich is a globally respected change management leader with more than 30 years of experience delivering large scale transformational change across public and private sectors. He is a founding member of ACMP, former Toronto chapter president, and currently president of ACMP Global. Rich has helped shape the profession worldwide. He's an author, educator, and a relentless advocate for bringing humanity, curiosity, and practical solutions to leading change. Rich, thank you so much for being here today with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, I know we kind of gave you a little bit of a bio. Yeah, just kind of prepared for it. But I'm sure the listeners want to hear from you. So why don't you go ahead and maybe introduce yourself for those who are listening?
Yeah, sure. So, oh gosh, I could do the very long version or the Coles Notes version, but given time constraints, I'll go for the Coles Notes version. Literally, I do what I love and I love what I do in my professional space. And that's all around the fact that I want people to realize their full potential. And sometimes that means supporting people to discover how they need to change, discover what they need to change, and discover that they need to go on a journey of change. And that's where, I mentioned change three times there in that one statement, because that's really my anchor is focused on people-centric change and all the support mechanisms that are involved in that and maybe with a hint of progressive dynamism. And maybe I'll come back to that a little later on in the conversation, what I mean by that.
I love that. I love that. And honestly, I've been following you for a long time. I think the first time I've been an ACMP member for, I think this is my third year now. The first year I was kind of like, I don't really know. I want to join it because I've heard so much about it and let me just get my feet wet into it. Year two, I was like, all right, I need to like do more to be a little bit more involved. And I attended the Change Chicago,
Yeah.
which was last year, right? And I remember you jumping on stage in Change Chicago. There were not a lot of Canadians there, right? It was,
No.
and then when I found out that you were Canadian as well, and you were kind of there leading it, I was like, okay, are we the only Canadians here at this event? But we ended up finding a bunch of others. But yeah, that was kind of my first opportunity to kind of see you live in action, and I think just your approach overall to change and how you approach it with curiosity and like you said just like
Yeah.
different ways of thinking about it I think is so interesting, and it's been great to kind of follow along your journey and your learning or your teachings. It has been incredible, so really excited to dive right in. And for everyone who is new to the podcast, just so that you guys kind of know how we kind of approach this, we sit down with innovators, thinkers, change practitioners, and we ask them the same kind of set of questions just to understand kind of how they got into change management. And then we do a little bit of a lightning round at the end to get a little bit more, get to know you a little bit more, Rich, and get away from like the work stuff and let's talk about you personally. So we'll dive into the discussion questions first. And the first one, obviously, is how did you get started in change management?
Yeah. It's always an interesting little story about this, how I got into change management, because when I actually started in this, it wasn't called change management.
Right.
I predate the labeling here in times, doing this back in the early 90s when I was working, even though I am Canadian based just outside Toronto. This accent is not local to Toronto either. So my
I was gonna say,
background, yeah, my background historically, I come from Wales in the UK, and I spent a lot of time working for the government in the UK. And one of my very first experiences and how I got started in this was I had an operations manager that was in charge of the office I was working in, and they made a government announcement that they were rationalizing the number of locations that we would be operating from. And effectively closing 3 offices and merging all the people into the one office where I was based. And I always remember the conversation about this because my manager came to me and said, we're closing all these offices. A lot of people are not too happy about this, but people seem to quite like you. So can you go and make them happy about it? And that was my kind of mantra to begin with. And that's kind of held with me ever since. So my role is go make people happy about things they wouldn't otherwise be happy about. And I think that sums up change management in so many ways.
That really does, honestly. I feel like when I think about what it takes to be a really good change manager, or at least what I've seen, is really that like the empathy element, the curiosity. But at the end of the day, it's just like being a nice person, and people wanting to talk to you, right? And Rich, you have that vibe. It's like, you just want I want to tell you my whole life story and all my secrets. And sometimes that's what you need in a good change manager because you're kind of wanting them to tell you exactly what's on their mind and maybe the
Yeah.
stuff that they're not so willing to say out loud to their leaders, right? And so that you could really help them in the transition. I that's that totally makes sense to me and why you probably got hooked into change management after that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, 25 years, probably more, honestly, that you've been doing
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. It's actually this year will be 34 years in the field.
34.
So
Yes, sorry. Yeah, I think we said 30, right? So 34.
yeah, yeah.
That's wild. My
I
God,
know I'm
I
starting to age myself even more by talking about this, but then I
I won't tell
pretend
you
I
my
was
age.
only about 9 years old when I started. So that's
Yeah, that makes sense. So a lot of experiences, I imagine. So what is like one moment that challenged you the most? And what did you learn from it?
yeah. No surprise. I've had lots of challenging moments in various shapes and forms because I've been privileged to work on so many different types of things. But I think the one that strikes me would be from about, I don't know, 12, 13 years ago, and I've been working on a change initiative for about 15, 16 months. And I won't go into the full details of the initiative, be, partly because of keeping the client's confidence on what we worked on as well. But majority of the work was around some large scale restructuring in an organization. And I got to a point where I had the heads of human resources, information technology, and finance and admin as my key sponsors, but also my key challenges. And I'll explain what I mean by this. These were folks who, because I didn't have one unique sponsor for this particular project, they all had a piece of their own game in this situation that they were interested in the outcomes that we were working on. I also had to navigate the challenge of the three of them continually arguing between themselves as to whose decision or whose priority was the greatest priority of focus for this piece. And this was a huge initiative. We had like 7, I think it was, different little projects underneath it in a whole programmatic space and everything. And, each one of them had different drivers in the areas that these folks represented. But why I say about this being challenging was because I realized between about months 15 and 16 that I was turning up to check-in meetings, whatever we were calling them at that point in time, and I don't remember the exact language, but I was turning up to these and effectively sitting there with these 3 sponsors argued with each other. And then we'd get to the end and I'd go away and go back to my desk and do whatever I was doing. And then I realized I was actually being paid for doing nothing, which sounds a really weird thing to say and admit to, but it suddenly made me realize that it wasn't about the paycheck that I valued here. Yes, we all need the money to cover the bills and all the rest of it, but it was my reputational knowledge base that was being put at risk here. If I was not able to walk away from this event that had stagnated due to others' inability to make a decision because they didn't know what their role was or were unable to focus, then that would be a long-term detriment to myself. And so I had to cut the cord. And literally 15 months in, I said, I gave them one ultimatum and said something along the lines of, hey, if we can move forward, I'm here, but I'm putting you on watch. And it was really interesting because it was the first time in my career, particularly from a consulting space, where I took the initiative to control the engagement versus feeling like I was at the mercy of the engagement vendoring sort of circumstance. So it was suddenly like, no, no, no. I'm not at your beck and call to do what you want as you need it. It's actually about me taking control of this situation. And I did that, and a couple of months later, I walked away and did some other stuff, and haven't looked back since. But it was really a good engagement opportunity for me to recognize that it was a challenging experience, and I was frustrated, but it also was able to be turned into an opportunity to say, "Hey, remember, you're just as much in charge of being part of this engagement as the sponsor or the vendor requirements may dictate as well." And
Mhm.
yeah, that was that.
I think that's such a, I think that story would resonate with a lot of people. I'll say that it resonates with me. I myself am a consultant, and I run into this situation so many times where, you know, you're in a project and everything inside of you is like screaming to like walk away. and
Yeah.
and for every excuse in the book, I'm like, you know what? It's just another 3 months. It's just another 6 months. It's just another 12 months. And it'll get better. And where am I going to find my next piece of work? And I myself have struggled with ever walking away in situations. I want to ask, how long in your consulting like career, like as you were a consultant, had you how long were you a consultant when you made that decision? Were you like in year five of your consultancy, or how long were you in there?
I was about 3.5 years in to my
Wow.
consulting career at that point. That said, because of I think my history of internally working in a somewhat consultative space, I
Hmm.
would say that that was consultant with my ownership versus consultative practice for many years before internally. So
Mm,
probably if you look at it from a career point of view, I was probably a good 8 to 10 years into practicing as a consultant, even if it was
right.
only more of an internal sort of space prior to that.
Still very humble of you. I think 3.5 years, that's still very, like, it's still a very difficult decision to make, but likely
Yeah.
the right one, right? Because,
Oh, absolutely. And such a great learning curve for me on doing that and recognizing that ownership. And actually, it's also given me an additional piece of learning for myself in so much as I've recognized that full-time continuous contract gigs are not for me.
hmm.
That's the because I don't work well going into that environment where I'm almost becoming a pseudo employee, for want of a better phrase.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it doesn't work well for me, that. So that's been a
Yeah.
good moment as well.
Yeah, that's and it's yeah, you're learning as you go, right? And eventually,
Oh
I'm
yeah.
kind of still in that realm of like trying to figure out like what type of engagement works best for me. I have definitely kind of come to that similar realization where I don't necessarily like to have all my eggs in one basket and just work with one client at a time. I tend to like to work with multiple because dates change and it's
Yeah.
like I'd rather have something to fall back on instead of all of a sudden it ends and now I'm looking for work. So yeah, it's an amazing journey as you go into it, but kudos for you for making that really difficult decision. Let's move on to the next question, which is what's a big aha moment that shaped how you lead change today? 34 years. I'm sure there are quite a few.
Well, I suppose I've always been very fortunate, and I've had a few people comment about this with my whole approach to the change space, is that I'm lucky to have what I call a kind of instinctive nose for what to do in a change space. So I've never been somebody who's had to heavily rely on methodologies, tools, templates, or any other sort of space because I've kind of always had that gut feel to know what to do in change. But it's also something I've had to nurture and feed throughout. Lifelong learner, continuously learning, always keen on new things. But fundamentally, I think my one aha moment goes right the way back, almost to that first experience that I mentioned jokingly about making people happy. It was actually doing change with people, not to people. And it was really one of those leadership pieces where you recognize that a change needs to take place in an organization. And there's a drive from leadership to just make it happen. But that change is not going to be successful if you just do it to the people, only if you do it with the people so that they get some skin in the game on that themselves as they're doing that. And then it becomes important to them to make that change successful when they have some psychological connection or emotional currency, I suppose, with making the success for that change to take place. So that's probably one of my most important aha moments, but also something that I recommend to anybody coming into the practice or building their experience in the practice recognizes sooner rather than later. Because if they don't recognize it sooner, it's going to put more challenges and actually can be quite energy sapping as they go forward with not recognizing that space.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you on that. It's getting that buy-in, bringing them along with you. And I feel like a lot of the times it's sometimes we almost have like blinders on too to just focus on like those who are going to be, directly impacted by the change,
Yeah.
when it comes to like, an ERP system or CRM or whatever you're introducing. And we're always focused on the people who are going to be using it. But there's also that
Hmm.
element of those who are like helping launch the change on the project side too, where we're technically introducing change to them too. And sometimes
Yeah.
we ignore their experience and it's like, no, everyone is on this change journey and, we need buy-in across the board. And it's such an interesting problem to solve. Sometimes I always joke about like, why did I choose this
Yeah.
profession? This is so complex. But it's fun, it's I'm a solver at heart, and I feel like I wouldn't change it for the world. It's kind of like you said, you do what you love, right? And love what you do, sort of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what is one message you hope kind of the audience takes away from this conversation today?
Gosh, I suppose and it's kind of a mixed call to action, but also a confirmation or a recognition piece. Change professionals, the change management discipline is a tough space to work in for many people, but it can also be an extremely rewarding space for people because of the impact that you make on organizations, communities, all sorts of groups that you might work with. And I think for me, that kind of side piece to that is that will only continue the more people that work in the space share that experience with others. So for me, it's doing that duality, I suppose, of space is the message I want people to take. Recognizing how valuable it is to you and the reward that you get from doing the space, no matter how difficult and how challenged it may be working here, but also being able to advocate that value to others at the same time, because truly organizations that are successful and spaces that do change well are those that engage people who know how to help those people through it rather than, hey, let's just go with it and they can suck it up and see what happens. And we all see the fallout that comes from that. So I suppose that's my piece, and it lines up with that simple aha piece I mentioned about the doing it with people as well. All
Yeah.
connects to that stuff.
I love that. It's like building awareness to all
Yeah,
of the stuff that we go through just to make sure that everyone sees it. 'Cause sometimes it goes unseen, and it's like you said, change management can be a thankless job at times, but
yeah,
so rewarding. At
yeah.
the end of the day, some all you need is like one piece of feedback, and you're hooked for another 5 years.
Absolutely, absolutely. And like with myself, I'm very passionate about this, as you know, and I think anybody else who knows me about this. But that passion is both fueled by my experience in it, and all the people I get to share the benefits of that experience with. So it's double fueled up, and some people that can be a little bit too much fueled up as well, but it's good.
Yeah, it's good, right? So what is I mean, you're a trainer yourself, you're an author. I always am interested in asking this last question, which is, what is something that you're reading, watching, or learning from right now? Can be change related, it doesn't have to be. But yeah, what are you into right now?
I was thinking about this sort of space, and there was two tones I was kind of playing with. One is I'll be the very obvious piece is like I'm constantly learning what AI can do in this space at this moment, and I've always been an advocate, and that's why I mentioned about the progressiveness stuff earlier on in things in my approach. I've always been somebody who's like to be at the front of the curve of doing
Hmm.
anything, and I'm always constantly learning. I've been playing with AI probably for about, I know, at least 4 years now, and
Mm.
maybe a little bit longer with that in various shapes and forms, and how to do that. So that's one thing that I'm specifically learning for both my own betterment and the practice and the work that I do and everything like that. But then I think the other side really is just from a, I don't know what I would describe it as, maybe more personal than professional, but it's really about values and belief stuff and things like that. I'm very, very keen to recognize and support anything in the diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging space, and that's the stuff, and recognizing my own differences and those differences of others as well. Being based in Canada, it's very important to me to recognize what that means to First Nations and how things engage with them. And I've been fortunate to have several engagements with First Nation communities through change and understanding what that means and the differences there. So my personal stuff at the moment is really about getting myself up to speed on a lot of historical impact in Canada from what's happened with colonialization and how that impacted First Nations, and also recognition of the mosaic that makes up the Canadian space that we live in, of so many different societies and so many different backgrounds, ethnicities, languages, etc. And the gratitude I have for the wealth of information and resources that brings, and hey, even some good food sometimes as well.
Oh yeah, honestly, I could not agree with you more. I think Canada specifically, is like you said, such a mosaic, and I think we've only scratched the surface of like how we can capitalize on that diversity, that brings all these different perspectives. And I think when it comes to managing change, I mean, even managing change with one person, knowing myself, it's like,
Yeah,
get out and walk more, or you got to eat better, and all that kind of stuff. It's hard to even change myself. But when we're talking with organizations, we're dealing with hundreds, thousands, sometimes 10,000 people that we're changing, and each of them bring so many different perspectives and ways of thinking and cultures, and trying to approach kind of like a cookie approach it with, going out with this one version of
yeah,
this is going to apply to everyone. It just doesn't, right? And so educating
no,
ourselves to understand those nuances, I think, is just going to make us better as change managers, but also as, human beings in a
yeah.
multicultural, diverse society. So I love to hear that. And AI, of course. I feel like this is the year, Rich. I don't know. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that 2026, I think everyone's been playing with AI. I know I've been playing with it for a little bit, but I feel like I've just not even scratched the surface with AI. I was just on a call with Microsoft for a client this week, actually, and they started talking to me about Copilot and all these different agents that exist to help with like project management and like facilitator. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I didn't even know any of this stuff existed. How did I not know? So I feel like this is the year where people are starting to like, all right, we played with it. Now let's try to figure out how do we apply this to make it so that we're aligned to our values and it's helping
Yeah,
elevate what we can do rather than just like helping us write a communication. Yeah, I know. We've all done that. We've all done that once
absolutely,
or twice. So now
all
let's
good.
jump in. Let's all jump into the fun part. Really, I mean, this has all been fun. Don't get me wrong, but now we get a
Ah,
little bit personal. So this is the lightning round. And so before we wrap up, we're gonna kind of do these quick, short questions, and just to get to know you beyond your role and your title in change management. So the first one is, what is one habit that contributes to your success?
this was an interesting one for me because I would say simply it's saying yes. And I'll clarify what I mean by that is if something interests me and I think will be fun and interesting to do, say yes to it and work out how you'll manage to fit that into the schedule afterwards.
Mm,
Because you will regret it more if you say no and wonder what if, than actually if you say yes and have to challenge yourself to find out how to do it. So I
mm,
sometimes to my own detriment, I say
right.
yes a little bit too often, but I think it's definitely been the making of my success in what I do, has been
Hmm.
saying yes to something new and different
Yeah,
whenever it's arisen.
I love that. Yeah, that's amazing. What is, or what would you tell your 13-year-old self? We had a little bit of a fun with this one earlier, but what would you
Yeah,
say to little Rich?
yeah. So the instinct to me is to, as we said, is like, hey, things get better. Interestingly for me, 13-year-old me would have just moved countries when I was living in Botswana in Southern Africa, and I'd have just moved back to the UK for schooling as a 13-year-old me. So probably a lot more conversation to be had around that significant change and first time flying by myself as a solo traveler for 10 hours on a plane at the age of 13 probably says a lot about my travel later on in life. But I think if I'm saying 13-year-old me prepping for the future, it's remember to focus on what you enjoy doing, not just what you can do.
I love that. And that literally had me thinking of like 100 different questions I want to ask you, but we're on a time constraint. But
Sure.
that's great. Greatest advice you've ever received?
Oh, way back, probably 3 or 4 years into my whole working life, I had a manager who gave me the insight when well, at the time, it was replying to an informal internal system, but equivalent to email, because I go back to predating email being generic sort of communication tools here, but being given the advice of if you don't know how to answer somebody, don't answer somebody till you know how to answer somebody. And I know that sounds really a weird thing, but
Mm,
so many of us, and as I've done later in life, there's that instinct to just respond because it's an expectation to respond to an email coming in versus wait and respond when you can actually answer properly what it is. We live in a society, I see this now a lot more, of expected instant gratification of responses.
mhm.
Yet that's not always going to give the best response. You can give your best response if you give yourself time to think about it. So it kind of has snowballed from that through my career and my life from a very small piece where it was literally just like, just park it for a bit and come back to it. It's good.
Yeah, it's funny that you got that advice then, right? Because it's so
Yeah,
applicable. It's even more applicable now. And like back then, it was
absolutely.
like the fact that they still said, "Okay, you don't have to answer it right away." It's like if only they knew what life was going to be like.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What is a business or change resource or any resource really that you would recommend to the listeners?
So I can go with the predictable response of everything ACMP at this point in time, because obviously a lot of people don't realize the vast resources that you get access to as an ACMP member. There's a resource library that's got presentations and documentation and papers that have been published for the last 15 years of ACMP at every conference that there's been and all sorts of stuff. And you can literally see sometimes the timeline of people's thinking year on year that's gone through on that sort of stuff.
Mhm.
So you've got that, and then you've got the ACMP Connect community, which is a very, very active, engaged space. I've never come across anything that engaged in any other knowledge-based type piece. So I
Yeah.
think both of those enormously ACP. And I think just to sort of, add beyond ACMP, YouTube is a very under recognized learning tool. And I think I'm a very visual person. I recognize that in myself. But I've found myself recommending folks look up a YouTube video on what to do from a business point of view. Many people will say, "Oh, I'll look up a YouTube video on how to, I don't know,
Fix your
paint
sink.
that wall or rewire a plug or whatever, whatever it may be, that sort of stuff." But actually it could be just as useful. Like, look up what makes up a good communications plan. And there's several really good videos
Mm,
on YouTube that walk you through hand holding in a short period of time. So
yeah.
yeah, don't underestimate the value of things like that and video tools and that side of stuff as well.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And because I feel like I fall into that trap too. Because I
Yeah.
was I was just reading a deck from a consultant that pulled together like a list of, it was a recommendation on how to like collect employee data. And it was just like how you would use like an Excel spreadsheet in order to like keep it up to date and stuff. And there were like YouTube videos throughout that they linked out to. And I
Yeah.
remember looking at it and being like, huh, that's odd. And then I thought about it again. And I'm like, actually, that's super valuable. Like, how have I not thought about just going onto YouTube when I'm stuck? And for those of you who are watching this on YouTube, just go click your recommended, go down a rabbit hole
Yeah.
right here and see what happens. I'm sure it will be a great time. And then lastly, of course, oh, actually, before we dive into that, I just wanted to call out with ACMP Connect, such a great resource. Honestly,
Yeah.
I every time I am struggling with anything related to my projects and stuff, I will go on there and just say like, "Hey, what have you guys worked on?" And like within the hour, somebody's already responded. It's
Yeah.
incredible. So highly recommend that group. Best way to connect with you, Rich.
Best way probably is LinkedIn. These
Mm,
days, LinkedIn is probably my most active platform out of anything for connecting with me. And I'm probably the most active for where I post and I comment and I throw things out and all stuff like that as well. And I'm always welcoming people connecting with me on LinkedIn, as long as you're not trying to sell me on the next plastic option for whatever, or have a great Bitcoin option for me or anything like that. But yeah, I'm generally
yeah.
more than happy to do that, and I put links on my LinkedIn as well if people want to have a short Zoom call with me or things like that. I'm more than happy, as long as calendars permits. Happy to chat change with anybody anytime. Totally.
I'm Yeah. I feel like those spam messages have gotten so much worse to a point where I'm starting to get fooled by them. And so, but no, 100%. And I know you won't plug it, but Rich is an incredible educator. He's got a ton of training resources available. So be sure to check him out and all of those opportunities. It's a rich, hey, I just thought of that. It's a rich repository from Rich Batchelor. I think we
Awesome.
got your new slogan, Rich. So, Rich, thank you honestly so much for taking the time to join us here at the Change Cafe and for sharing your story your insights and your overall journey with us. It's been incredible. A 34-year journey, and we're trying to do it in 30 minutes. It just doesn't seem like it's going to be enough. For me, Rich, like I said, when I first saw you on stage at Change Chicago, I was like, oh my God, I've got to talk to this guy. He just seems so passionate about, change management. It just seems like you get it. And you're just uncommitted. You're uncommitted. Your unwavering commitment to change management. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's totally different from what I meant to say. It's just so like motivating, and it just really something that encourages me to keep going through. Just seeing advocates like yourself who are so passionate, it really just gets us through those tough days. And to know that the amount of work that you've done as part of ACMP, both being a founding member, then starting up to ACMP Toronto, which is now ACMP Ontario, which you had a hand in transitioning, and then being at the global level, as the president for ACMP. You really just try to embody everything, and so it's incredible to have you as an ambassador for us as a community, and really just helping to elevate the practice of change management really worldwide. It's incredible. And if any of you want to see Rich or myself, be sure to come to Change Orlando, because I'm sure we're going to be there. And I know, Rich, you're doing a workshop, which I'm trying to get into. I didn't realize you had to register right when you registered for the whole thing, so I'm trying to get in. But yes, go check it out. It should be a lot of fun. If it's anything like Change Chicago, it's going to be incredible. It's going to be a really great time. And to all of our listeners, thank you for joining us for episode 2 of the Change Cafe. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to subscribe and share it with your colleague. And don't forget to follow ACMP Ontario on LinkedIn. And of course, Rich, don't forget Rich, for any updates on future episodes and events that will be coming up in your area. We've got a ton of in-person and virtual events planned for 2026, so you don't want to miss out. So be sure to follow us on LinkedIn. I'm Andrew Ourique, and this has been the Change Cafe. Until next time, conversation going. Thanks, everyone.